Hello everyone, this is Xander Duron, and I don't feel like playing the game right now. Instead, I'm gonna whine and complain about something completely pointless. What is that completely pointless thing, you might ask? The webbing on these guys. Like, seriously, what the hell is this supposed to be? Eugen, this is literally unplayable. This is not anything Canada was using during the Cold War. Same goes for the Anzacs. It's the same stuff. But seriously, what the fuck is that? It looks like frickin' British powder 1937 webbing. What is with that? Like, I cannot actually tell what it's supposed to be if it's based off anything real. Like, my best guess would be based off maybe British pattern 1958 or maybe the Canadian 1954 or so pattern webbing equipment. It's hard to tell. All I know is that within time frame, Canada would not be using web equipment like this. In fact, in time frame, Canada would be using two different patterns. For 75 infantry, you'd be looking at pattern 1964 webbing, which is I probably have to throw up some pictures to explain it. But the best way to describe pattern 1964 web equipment is it's a two-part system. You have the webbing itself, which it's a fairly basic webbing. I actually myself have a partial example of one. It's a I'm not familiar with all the terminology. It's a basically it has the two straps, on the front, which joins together into what like a Y strap on the back of your neck into a single strap going down your back. That's how I'm going to describe it. I can throw up some pictures for you. Yeah. Anyway. So you have that. And of course, the thing to note is that the pattern 1964 webbing itself only carry, in terms of like actual, like, basically it carries the pistol holster for a Browning high power, a grenade pouch, which was apparently is meant to carry two grenades. I think it was with the C-13, or I think it was so basically American M67 if I recall correctly. But apparently you can only really fit 1.5 grenades in it, though it could carry, I think, is up to 5 of the V40 mini grenades. Also, the grenade pouch also has a loop underneath it that's ostensibly it's supposed to carry the adapter for the rifle grenades for the C1A1, or when the webbing's adapted is just the C1 SLR. It also has the mess tin pouch, which is this big pouch that you put your mess tin in. It has the canteen pouch, and it has your gas mask bag. It does not. The web equipment did not actually carry any magazines. For the magazines, apparently my cat doesn't want me making this video. I don't blame him. Anyway, as I was saying, the magazines for the C1 were carried, or to be specific, the C1 battle rifle, not the C1 submachine gun. I'll address the submachine gun in a little bit. For the C1 battle rifle, the magazines were carried on a chest rig that holds 4 magazines. Of course, if I recall correctly, Canadian soldier in the time period was issued, I think, 6 or 7 magazines. So obviously you have 4 in the chest carrier, you have 1 in your rifle, and then the other 2, 1 or 2, I can't remember the exact number, are carried in the combat uniform itself, which had these big pockets on it that were meant to carry magazines. Apparently, my dad used to have an example of it. We have no idea where it went to. We might have accidentally given it away at some point or thrown it out. It should be a shame. Anyway, but I digress. So, yep. Of course, the thing is that fun fact, the Canadian 1964 pattern web equipment, or I think the technical term is pattern 1964 web equipment, doesn't really matter, did not actually come with any provisions for carrying the C1 submachine gun magazines. I shall show you on my engineers. There we go. It didn't actually have any actual magazines or magazine carriers that came with the equipment or designed for the equipment. So what anybody with a C-17 machine gun did was they just used the large pockets I mentioned earlier, or they also use the the magazine carrier from the older 1954 web equipment, if I recall correctly. Most of the factual mistakes I'm making here I'll just correct in the subtitles if I can find the proper information on them while editing this. Anyway. So yeah, they didn't actually have any proper magazine carriers for the Sterlings, which apparently annoyed a lot of people. And as general, from what I've read, for the most part, the Pattern 1964 web equipment was not exactly well liked. It was, like I said, everything is held together with Velcro. That's all the straps connected, so that could potentially get fouled up easily or wear out over time. Like I know with my example, I wear it for paintball, and I have to keep the Velcro clean, otherwise, yeah, it can fall apart on me. And also, it has relatively thin straps. As I cough. It had relatively thin straps, or has, and they don't have any padding on them, so it's really not designed to carry a lot of weight, which could be an issue. It is an issue. So it's not the most comfortable thing to wear either. But from what I've read on like some of the forums, that is, if you're like a rear line sort of dude, then yeah, it's actually not bad. But if you're actually, a rifleman, it's not the most comfortable, especially like with the chest rig for your magazines. It's pretty hard to, or pretty annoying to use it while trying to fire from the prone position or reload from the prone position. Anyway, so that's the Pattern 1964. I'll go back to my rifles, and then you have the Pattern 1982, I do believe. That's what it'd be called. Obviously, it was introduced in 1982. And that's what any, post-80s Canadian infantry should be using. Doesn't really matter. I can probably just do this. Get rid of all those Anzacs and Brits. Anyway, as I was saying, so that was the last webbing equipment issued to the Canadian Forces in the 20th century. So any Cat B and A Canadian infantry would be using 1982 pattern web equipment. And it's a bit different. It has, the two straps that join together, but it also has padding on the shoulders and back. And it's the design of it's based off a bunch of research that I think it was the U.S. Army did, or somebody in the U.S. did, on, how you should distribute a soldier's load equipment and how much a soldier can carry for how much time. Interesting read if you actually want to look at it. Oh, water. It's a little dry, but it's just that kind of interesting stuff that you don't really think about, but it's, pretty relevant for, a soldier. Anyway, so the 1982 pattern equipment, I actually have a couple of bits and pieces from it as well. Namely, I have a Sterling submachine gun magazine carrier, has pouch for 3. It's a pouch that has space for 3 magazines. And I also have the holster, the pistol holster for it. For the 1964, I have the webbing itself, and I have the mess kit. The mess kit carrier, but I don't have the mess kit itself. I have the grenade pouch, which is in pretty rough shape, probably from somebody trying to, put 2 grenades in it. And I think that'd be about it. So I only have a partial thing. Anyway, as I was saying before I get too sidetracked. So yeah, they have the 1982, which once again does not look anything like this. And for 1982, you had it had holster, had the also interesting with the 1982 is that the gas mask bag could either be attached to the webbing itself, though it also had, it could also be worn with a sling or a bag, as a bag. That way you could have it on you at all times. For magazine, it came with, as I alluded to when I talk about my own webbing equipment, it came with an actual dedicated pouch for this C1 submachine gun. Also had magazine pouches for the, there we go, C1A1 and the C2A1. You know, for 20 and 30 round magazines. And then when the C7 was adopted in 1984, so I do believe, it got the new magazine pouches for C7 magazines, 30 round. Of course, you know, as I said, this is just a stupid little video I'm making because I felt like making a video, but I didn't actually feel like playing the game because it's pretty late. And I just felt like bitching about something that's really inconsequential. You know. What else can I talk about? Yeah. That's all I have to say. Interesting note, this dude is carrying a C9, not a C6. Of course, C9 just being the Canadian name for the Mini-Me. Because in Canada, we stick a C in front of everything. And sometimes our own numbers. No, hey there, boy. That's not a Leopard 1A3, that's a Leopard C1. That's not a Leopard 1A5, that's a Leopard C2, eh? What else can I make fun of? Yeah, that's about it. So yeah. There's probably some other things I can point out when it comes to Canadians. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this. Got the Pathfinders with their carbine M727, which as far as I know was never used by the Canadian forces at any point. But I digress. It's gameplay reasons, I suppose. Though Canada did adopt the C8, I do believe, in 1994 or 5, which would technically make it in time frame. As you can see from the Dutch Stoottroepen, or no, not Stoottroepen, it's the Corps Mariner, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, there you go. Except they call it the C7 carbine. Actual name is C8. And the original version was not a flat top. It was a, whatchamacallit. It had the hand grip sight on it, I do believe. What else is there to talk about? Oh yeah. Eugen. Where's my false cockpit? All the CF-18 Hornets got the false cockpit. You know. Because close range knife fighting is definitely something the Canadian Air Force has to worry about getting into. The Royal Canadian Air Force. Or as it would be known as in time frame, the Canadian Forces Air Command. And yeah. I'm running out of things to talk to in this stupid little video. Oh, there's something else I can talk about. The Recce team. It's from 1980, has a C7. C7 wasn't adopted until like 3 or 4 years later. They also have the C15 LRSW, which is from the late 90s, if I recall correctly. This is when that was adopted. Everybody knows that as the, you know, Macmillan TAC 50. As far as I know, is a late 90s weapon. When it was or at least was officially adopted. And really, if you want to, you could just move these guys to Cat A, and it really would make no difference whatsoever. I don't think anybody's playing Cat C Canada or Commonwealth. What else is there? Oh, I already dedicated an entire video to the Coyote. Chimera never existed, as we all know, or it existed as a concept, a drawing. As I mentioned, like every other time I see the Lav-3 toe under armor, it's clearly a bison. Lav-3 does not look anything like that. Or, that's not fair to say. The Lav-3, they're Moeg piranhas. They all look vaguely similar. You know, but it's pretty clearly a bison. Maybe I'll do a video on the bison. Fun fact, it was like designed over in like less than a week. They basically just put a box on rails in the back of a Moeg, second generation Moeg piranha. Originally, the bison was intended for the Canadian Forces Reserve. I think at this point they're still calling it the militia. I can't remember. It was meant for the reserve force. However, upon delivery, the regular force decided to to appropriate all of the bisons. They served as, APCs on peacekeeping missions until the Lav-3 was adopted in 1999. After which the bison was used in just specialist roles, particularly command post roles and ambulance. This is very common use as a battlefield ambulance in Afghanistan, but that's, out of time frame. Cougar has the wrong turret. This is just an upsized Grizzly turret, when it should be tankety tank if I select it properly. Should have the same turret as the Scorpion. It's not a major issue. Anything else I can complain about? I honestly can't complain about the TH-495. Except for the fact it's lacking a pintle-mounted weapon. But that's whatever, I guess. Alright, has an autocannon. Does it really need more? Anything else? Also, just like the bison, the Grizzlies were originally meant more towards reserve forces. Though the Canadian, just because they were less maintenance intensive than the M113s. So they figured it'd be easier to use them with the reserves. And however, the Canadian Forces found that these things were pretty handy on peacekeeping missions, so they saw pretty heavy use of those, especially in the late 80s into the 90s. The Cougars were originally meant as training vehicles for tank crews, so you didn't have to waste valuable tanks on training. You could just use a Cougar. Yep. And then, once again, they were deployed on peacekeeping missions, most infamously in the Balkans and the former Yugoslavia, which was a bit of a controversial decision. Turns out people weren't too keen on getting into a 76mm versus 125mm gunfight. But these were not really meant for direct combat, and most are meant to do battlefield reconnaissance, maybe fire support. Any other things I can prattle on about? Actually, something I want to check. There we go. How many helicopters? If I recall correctly, the Canadian Forces didn't actually use that many CH-118s. I may be incorrect. The Canadian Forces used the CH-135 in greater quantities. So technically speaking, Canada should have more CH-135s than CH-118s. But that's, whatever. Anything else? The Grizzly can only hold 6 people. And that's if they're fairly lightly equipped. If you or have like people in their winter clothing, then you can only fit like 4 in the rear of the Grizzly. What else? I can't think of anything else to point out. I think I said in my NORAD deck building video that this thing never really existed. This was never used by Canada. ADATs, that's a thing. ADATs is definitely a thing. I'm not too knowledgeable about the Canadian Artillery Park. All I know is that they retired all of the M109A2s. Or all the M109s in general. I think they retired those in, what was it? I think it was in the late 90s, early 2000s. They retired all of these and just stuck with the towed M777 howitzers. Anything else? Anything else in the air tab? If they're Eugen really wanted to, they could give Canada a second CF-116, and just call it the CF-5 because that was the common name for it. Same thing, in a similar vein to what they did with the CF-18 and CF-188. It's literally the exact same plane. It's just CF-18 is the common name. CF-188 is the official designation. As far as I know, the EF-101B Electric Voodoo was just a jammer plane. It wasn't actually designed for using anti-radiation missiles. And what else is there? I think Canada had one of these that they borrowed for testing, and then they gave back to whoever was the one who did the modifications to it. You had the CF-104 Starfighter. One of the nicknames this thing got from the pilots was the Lawn Dart. It's also known as the Aluminum Death Tube and the Flying Phallus. Contrary to popular belief, it was never known as the Widowmaker, though it did have a relatively high failure rate, but not as high as the Sabres that the Canadian Air Force operated. Sabres had a pretty high loss percentage of airframes lost due to accidents. Anything else? Anything else? These guys are carrying a C2A1, not a C6. Nope, I'm running on fumes here for complaining about random things. Fun fact, Canada has never used the ERX in combat. Or, they never fired an ERX in combat, as far as I know. While they were deployed to Afghanistan, the ERX is primarily used for the thermal sight on it. The Mirabel site, I do believe it's called. It was, that was the best way to describe it. It's a thermal sight. It's a pretty high quality thermal sight. It can see farther than the missile can be fired. Because in real life, the missile is only 600 meters. It's designed for urban combat and other close combat situations. And what else is there? Fun fact, the fact that Canada has the TH-495 in-game means that it actually should not have the LAV-3 beak. The reason for that is, well, I'll just go back to the armory, that way I can have them and the view at the same time. So you have the LAV 3, and you have basically the TH-495 was going to be adopted by the Canadian Forces in the early to mid 90s. However, the Conservative government under Brian Mulroney came under heavy criticism, mostly due to corruption allegations and from the Airbus affair, which was the but how's the best way? Basically, the Airbus affair was basically, this is back when Air Canada was still a Crown corporation, so it was still owned directly by the Canadian government. And basically, what happened was there's a competition to see, what they replaced their fleet of airliners with, whether it be, Airbus or Boeing planes. Boeing, in their bid, purchased, I think it was de Havilland Canada, so they could build the planes in Canada and parts for them, boost the Canadian economy. That's always a good way to get favor with the Canadian government. And then Airbus won the contract. And there was a bunch of controversy over it, especially when it came to light that apparently Airbus had been paying certain members of Brian Mulroney's government. There was kickbacks and some commissions-based stuff, and that came under a lot of controversy, and that was the Airbus affair. And part of that was the person who was helping with the lobbying for the Airbus affair. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Was also part of the lobbying for that site Thyssen Henschel was doing for the TH-495. So basically, that fell apart along with Brian Mulroney's government. He resigned as Prime Minister, and Kim Campbell stepped in, Canada's first female Prime Minister. And I think she was in office all of 5 months before an election was called and she lost. Nothing really to do with her. It has more to do with the fact that, the Conservative government wasn't too popular at that point in time due to all the corruption scandals and whatnot. Anyway, so I think it was in the 93. I'd have to double. I can't remember all the election dates. Anyway, so I think it was in 93. I want to say was so. Brian Mulroney gets kicked out. Jean Chrétien and the Liberals come into power, and Jean Chrétien, it's pretty infamous for just slashing the Canadian Forces budget at the time. In particular, he cancelled the TH-495, and it was eventually replaced with the LAV 3, which is not this at all, whatsoever. Just imagine this thing, except the boxy part here extends all the way around. It doesn't have a pointy nose, it has a blunt nose. I can show you pictures or something of it. But anyway. Yeah. Anything else I can ramble on about? I do believe the M113 TOW Under Armour saw service in the former Yugoslavia, particularly the Battle of Medak Pocket, during the role that the Canadian Forces played in it, though I don't believe this actually was fired in anger at all during the engagement. But it doesn't matter. Do I want to talk about anything else? This video is almost it's almost half an hour long. I wasn't aware that Canada put SS-111 or SS-11s on the CH-118. Okay, I really wish that the CH-135 got the minigun and CRV-7 heat rockets. Because that'd make it, really, honestly, at that point, it'd be probably like a 50-point helicopter. But, it'd have 4 HP, which make it, less likely to die to man pads. It'd take, 2 shots from like a Stinger or an Igla to die instead of one. Or, yeah, there you go. I can pin to compare. Basically, the better airframe has a worse loadout, in my opinion. They do have the anti-armor CRV7s, though I do believe that the CRV7 couldn't be mounted on helicopters until I think the mid to late 80s, because the CRV7 is actually interesting. The CRV7 rocket, which if I recall correctly actually stands for Canadian Rocket Vehicle 7 or something like that, it uses the same warhead as the American Hydra rockets, but it has a different mortar, which makes it a lot more basically makes it faster and more accurate. However, it produced a lot of smoke. And the thing is, the CRV7 was originally designed for use on airplanes. So an airplane doesn't really matter how much smoke the rockets generate when firing, because it's not going to bother the airplane whatsoever. It's already gone. However, on a helicopter, it produces a lot of smoke, and you can't really see in that smoke. So I think it's the mid to late 80s, like 86 or 7, I can't remember, they designed a version of the CRV7 optimized for use on helicopters. They changed the fuel composition around a bit. It was not as fast, but it produced far less smoke, and was therefore less hazardous for using in a helicopter. What else can I ramble on about? Tanks. Technically speaking, the Leopard C2s are out of time frame. As far as I know, basically what a Leopard C2 is, it's a turret from its surplus German Leopard 1A5s mounted on the hull from a Leopard C1. With some modifications, if I recall correctly. Anyway. What else do I want to say? So, yeah. And why I say it's out of time frame is, if I recall correctly, the Canadian government did not purchase the Leopard 1A5 turrets until I think about the late 90s, which would put it out of time frame. Though it'd make Canada's tank game even worse than it already is. Leopard C2 Maxis, if I recall correctly, is actually from the war in Afghanistan. Like, that's when it saw use. Though if I read correctly, in Yugoslavia, Canada did deploy Leopard C1s, which are up-armored with Maxis. The modular expanded armor system. I do believe it's the medium composition, which is designed to protect against autocannon ammunition, primarily, and heat warheads. But I'm not overly knowledgeable on all the specifics. It's a nice looking tank, though. At least I think it is. Moving on. It's kind of funny that Canada has Centurions and Leopards serving at the same time. Basically, Canada was having a lot of problems with the Centurions just being old and worn out. So in the late 80s, they purchased a bunch of Leopards to replace them entirely. I think they kept them on reserve for a bit, but really after the Leopards entered service, the Centurions were gone. Yeah. Anything else? I can't think of anything else. I think I'm going to call it here. The Iltis, it gets exceptional optics. But the Coyote, the vehicle that was declared to be one of the most advanced, or if not the most advanced and sophisticated surveillance platform in the world when it's introduced, gets very good. But I think I already bitched about that in my coyote video I made at the behest of Razman. You know, so he'd stop bothering me about it. Yep. Fun fact, the Coyote replaced the M113 CNR Lynx, which replaced the Ferret, which has a Union Jack on it because reasons. Let's see, CH-136, that's no longer in service if I recall correctly. Chinooks. Fun fact, Canada sold all of its Chinooks in the 90s to the Netherlands. One of the reasons for this was there's some budget concerns, and the Land Force or the Land Force Command, or whatever the army was called at the time, and the Air Command had a disagreement on who should be paying for the upkeep and maintenance of the Chinooks. The Air Force said, the Army uses it, so you guys pay for it. The Army said it flies, so the Air Force should pay for it. And the government said, if you guys... And basically the government said no one pays for it and sold it. Also that face. I love the Chinook face. It's the greatest. So yeah, basically, yeah, Canada sold its Chinook. So, you know, later on, you know, a decade later, basically, or not quite a decade later, these are sold in the mid to late 90s by the Jean Chrétien's Liberal government. Basically what happened was, you know, they got sold to the Netherlands, and then in Afghanistan, the Canadian forces needed to use some Chinook, so they got the Dutch to help them. And apparently, on the Dutch Chinooks, you could still see the maple leaves that were painted over. C'est la vie. No, this is almost 40 minutes. And I'm just going to call it here. Yep, I'm calling it here. This is probably literally the most boring video I ever made. Oh, the Coyote video was pretty boring, but it was only like 5 minutes long or 6 minutes long. However long. It was not 40 minutes long. I'm done. Good night. I'm done. I'm just done.